We are now live, sir. Dave, you can start.
Yeah. So I think we have reached a maximum reasonable number of participants. So good evening. Good evening to all the attendees gathered here and to all the distinguished panelists. And it is a great evening. We are going to have a wonderful webinar session on the topic law of damages. One of our one of our KFCRI and IIT gathered webinar series, the topic of law of damages. So before moving on to the webinar session, I would like to go on with some housekeeping rules. So I would request all the attendees not to use the chat box and unless you are facing any technical glitch or network glitch. So if you have any questions to be asked to the direct panelists, you can start putting in the Q&A box starting from the session. So next, I would like to speak a few words about KFCRI. KFCRI is Kawais Foundation Conflict Resolution International. So we as institution, one of the fast growing institution globally, have three distinguished features. So one, as an institution, we have our own rules, like we have our own rules for arbitration, we have our own rules for mediation, and we do have our own rules for conciliations. So as another body, as another distinguished feature, we play a role of accreditation. So we do accreditation at various level of arbitration, like AAP, AFAP. Similarly, we do have our own accreditation system for mediation. So this is the role of an accreditation system in KFCRI. So I would like to introduce Mr. Inbav Jain sir to speak about the lead panelists.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening to one and all present here, particularly the IITR members. Today we have a special topic to be delivered by Mr. P. Rishikesh. Mr. Rishikesh is an alumni of Dr. Ambedkar Law College, Chennai. And more particularly, he is a second generation practicing lawyer with 15 years of rich experience. Initially, he started his career as an advocate from the chambers of Mr. R. Murari, a prominent senior advocate in Madras. And further, he started his own independent practice in 2008. Predominantly, he specializes in corporate, arbitration, tax matters, as well as appearing in all forums, all the civil forums. To add on, he is a member of the Bar Association, the Madras Bar Association, the Revenue Bar Association, and he was for a couple of years an executive committee member of Madras Bar Association. As an academician, he used to regularly visit Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College in a part-time lecture capacity, teaching business and corporate law for students, particularly in the PG Diploma in Business Law. As a sportsman, he captained the cricket team of the law college, and as a mooter, he was announced as the best speaker for Jessup Moot India Rounds, February 2004. Now we have Mr. Rishikesh, who is going to deliver the very interesting topic about law of damages for the members of Indian Institution of Technical Arbitrators for another 45 to 50 minutes. Mr. Rishikesh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Inbavijian, for these nice words about me. Friends, when Mr. Pichaimuthi called me and he said you have to address a gathering, and I asked him who will be the audience. He said the Institute of Engineers and Arbitrators. So straight away I was slightly nervous because I'm going to address an audience who are knowledgeable about this topic. And the topic that I had to choose was law of damages. But there was a rider which came along with it. Mr. Pichaimuthi said I should not exceed 40 minutes. Mr. Inbavijian has been gracious to tell it's 50 minutes. But this topic of damages, it's very difficult to cover within 45 to 50 minutes. It's humongous. It's huge. Therefore, what I've done, I'm only going to concentrate the law of damages from a perspective of building and engineering contracts. Because under damages, there are a lot of topics to be spoken about. It can go up to 2.5, 3 hours. So for 45 minutes, since time has been made the essence, it's been made very specific that I have to restrict within 45 minutes. I'll be concentrating on law of damages with respect to building and engineering contracts. Number two, as you're all experts in this field, you would know the basics. What is damages, the kinds of damages. Therefore, what I have done, I've chosen 4 to 5 very famous and very crucial judgments which evolved and established the law of damages throughout the world. So I will be giving those judgments, the facts and how the judges view, and what as arbitrators or as counsels advising clients should do when it comes to awarding of damages. Now, though I said I won't be sticking to the basics, now these are the very fundamental thing that everybody has to know. So that is why this slide will contain this basic introductory things. So as you all know, damages in simple terms refer to a form of compensation due to a breach, loss, or injury. Now, damages always refer to compensation awarded which has been sought for. Now, under the Indian Contract Act 1872, there are 2 provisions which uses the word compensation with reference to liquidated and unliquidated damages, being 73 and 74 of the Indian Contract Act. So there are plethora of judgments on what damages is. So I've just pulled out the most fundamental thing from these judgments. In short, damages are remedy in the nature of monetary compensation that an aggrieved party can claim from the defaulting party when a breach of contract occurs and results in loss or injury to the aggrieved party. The most important thing for a claim of damages to be raised is, of course, a breach of contract. So there has to be a contract, and only if a breach arises, the cause of action for claiming damages as a corollary also arises. So that is a fundamental thing. Now, this is again very basic. I'm not going to explain in detail of what these are, but just a bird's eye view. Now, types of damages, there is general, there's special, nominal, substantial, speculative, aggravated, and exemplary damages. And of course, as you all know, liquidated and unliquidated damages. As far as building and engineering contracts are concerned, it is the general damages, the liquidated, unliquidated is what we all would come across on a daily basis. Now, again, this slide will also talk of something very fundamental. Once a breach of contract happens, what are the remedies available to a party, to the aggrieved party, is one specific performance. Now, specific performance, as you all know, it is statutory and it depends on the contractual conditions. As far as specific performance is concerned, we're all governed by the Specific Relief Act. And the other remedy for breach of contract is damages. Now, I've already explained it. So damages are the award of monetary damages or non-performance governed by the Indian Contract Act. And you all know unliquidated damages, which is covered under the section 74 of the Indian Contract Act. So these 2 sections I've just jotted out, 73 and 74, the primary difference between these both. So the first thing, the common factor between 73 and 74, that is unliquidated damages and liquidated damages, is first the breach. So as far as section 73 unliquidated damages are concerned, breach must be followed by loss or damage which results from the breach, and the loss or damage should be of such nature that it arose in the usual course of things from such breach, or parties knew that such a loss or damage could subsequently arise at the end of the time of entering into a contract. Now, these words, you will find it in section 73 itself. And as you all know, Indian contract was 1872, and these exact words were actually taken from a judgment much before that. I'll come to it in the next slide. 74, as far as 74 is concerned, it is again damages, but it is a cap on damages. That is why it's called liquidated damages. It is compensation again arising out of a breach, the compensation shall be reasonable, and that sum is always contemplated or determined in the contract itself. So that's the primary difference between 73 and 74. 73 remains unliquidated, while 74 is liquidated with a cap on damages. Now, this is the first judgment that I've picked. You all would have heard about Hadley versus Baxendale. There would be no student of law of contract without reading this. But I would like to highlight the facts of this case, because most of the textbooks do not give the facts of Hadley versus Baxendale, because this judgment is crucial to section 73. In fact, if you read the judgment and also come back to section 73, you will find the exact words used by Judge Alderman then has been transformed into legislation under the Indian Contract Act. Now, these are the facts. Very interesting case to read. One of the first cases where you will come out of an interesting claim on damages being raised. Now, Hadley had a mill. It was a corn mill. He owned a corn mill in Gloucester. What he used to do is he used to clean the corn, grind them up, ground it into a meal, processed it, and that flour was used. So basically, he had a small corn mill. Now, to do that, to get that flour, he had a machine which used to run by a steam engine, and that steam engine run machine had a crankshaft. Now, this was his livelihood. Now, one day, what happened? His crankshaft was broken. So therefore, he wanted an engineer to repair that crankshaft. So what Hadley did was to contact one Mrs. Joyce and Company, who agreed to repair it and give. But what Joyce wanted was, he wanted the broken shaft to be sent to them, so that based on it, he would prepare a new shaft and send it back. So this was the agreement. So what Hadley wanted to do was to send this broken shaft to Joyce and Company. Therefore, he calls Baxendale, who was a very popular carrier, or rather a transporter then, and therefore entered into a contract with him and said, look, you have to deliver this broken shaft to my engineer Joyce and Company, and he'll replace it, and you have to bring back and give it to him. Now, there was a small understanding among them, and Baxendale had to deliver this and come back to Hadley with a new shaft. But unfortunately, Baxendale failed to deliver on the date agreed, therefore causing some loss to Hadley's business. Now, Hadley goes to court and sues Baxendale for late delivery. But under what claim is very important. This was the first of the cases where Hadley sues for loss of profit. Now, this loss of profit claim, you all know, would have, in many arbitrations, this is one of the claims raised. And in most of them, this is rejected also. Supreme Court has laid down certain guidelines of when you should give loss of profits. So here was Hadley in 1854 sues Baxendale for late delivery under the claim for loss of profits. He succeeds in the lower court, the trial court, and 25 pounds as damages was awarded. Now, Baxendale takes it on appeal, and the appeal is allowed. Very interestingly, the reason why the appeal is allowed, I'll show the exact words used by the judge. Justice Alderson was the appellate court judge who heard the matter, and his picture I have given it as a tribute to him, because it is these words which almost governs the law on unliquidated damages or compensation throughout the world. If you take any act or any law under damages, you will find these words of Justice Alderman, who made this in 1854. This is the crucial paragraph that he made. He says, where two parties have made a contract, which one of them is broken, the damages which the other party ought to receive in respect to such breach of contract should be such as may fairly and reasonably be considered either arising naturally, that is, according to the usual course of things, from such breach of contract itself, or such as may reasonably be supposed to have been in the contemplation of both parties at the time they made the contract as the probable result of the breach of it. Now look at the choice of words which Justice Alderman uses. First is there must be a breach. We have no doubt about it. And the breach should be such as may fairly and reasonably be considered either arising naturally according to the usual course of things. And the most important thing is that both parties should have contemplated that certain things would have accrued if such breach had happened. So when they analyzed the case, this claim of loss of profits was not envisaged or was not within knowledge of Baxendale. Baxendale never knew if there was a breach of contract, he would be liable to pay loss of profits. That knowledge Baxendale never had. And it is on that ground the appeal of Baxendale was allowed and loss of profit damages was refused for Hadley. Though the judges held there is a breach and he'll be entitled for a nominal damages alone and but not for a special damages because the person who breached never knew his breach would cause such loss to such particular person. So this is the key takeaway. Now these are the most important words that you will have to take away from Hadley versus Baxendale, because as I said, the language used under 73 is almost similar to the words used by Justice Alderman in 1854. So the damages claimed must be arising naturally according to the usual course of things. That meant in 1854, claim towards loss of profit was not arising naturally, was not in the usual course of things. And most importantly, natural and proximate consequences of a breach or those consequences which were in the parties' contemplation at the time of the contract. Which means at the time of the contract, what was the intention of both parties? Did they reserve some right for damages if one party had to break the contract? If there was no such contemplation, then such damages cannot be raised or sought for. The other important thing under Hadley versus Baxendale is that proximate and natural consequences are those that flow directly or closely from the breach in the usual and normal course of events, those which a reasonable man or a person of an ordinary prudence would be able to foresee. So you'll have to step into the shoes of the contracting party. Not stopping with that, you have to be a reasonable man and a person of an ordinary prudence would be able to foresee. So the phrase in the party's contemplation would always mean reasonable contemplation of the party who breaches the contract. So you'll also, as an arbitrator or as a counsel advising, you can also step into the shoes of a person who's breaching the contract to look into whether you'll be liable to pay such damages. So therefore, in short, the phrases used by Judge Alterman would only mean that a party who breaches is liable only for reasonable losses, those that normally prudent man standing in his place, possessing his information, when contracting would have reason to foresee as probable consequence of future breach. So what was at that time reasonable or foreseeable depends on the knowledge then possessed by the parties. That is why these two words are also used, actual knowledge and imputed knowledge. Now, at this juncture, I'll also give you one more illustration because this is again very famous judgment called Harberts in 1970 England. Here what happened, there was a company. Now they had to store, it was a storage company, so they had to storage certain equipments and they have to maintain the temperature at 120 degrees at all times. So this was a simple contract given to a piping company. They had to put up these pipes to ensure that the storage devices are maintained at 120 degrees centigrade. The contract is entered into, the contract gets completed. But thereafter, the storage device is not able to maintain 120 degrees centigrade and it ultimately burns down. That contract also had a specific exclusionary clause which says if the equipment does not maintain 120 degrees temperature, even if there's a breach, the party would not be liable to pay any damages. That clause was specifically there. But the House of Lords in this judgment in 1972 goes one step further. Now just imagine, Hartley versus Baxendale in 1854, and in 1970, the English courts go one step ahead and say, there is an exclusionary clause, which means both parties knew if there was a breach of contract, the party liable for the breach would not be asked to pay compensation. But in spite of it, the breach today is a fundamental breach. The entire contract itself was asking the contractor to maintain the storage device at 120 degrees centigrade. And he was not able to maintain that. Now that is a fundamental breach itself. So therefore, there is no question of any other clause coming the way preventing from awarding damages. And therefore, the English courts in Harberts, Wain and Pump Company in 1970 would have awarded damages to the innocent party because of the fundamental breach caused by the contractor. Therefore, that is the causation effect. The first thing is there must be a breach. Now, there are a lot of contracts under the railways as well as the government PWD where there's always a clause which says for loss of idle machinery or escalation should not be charged, should not be gone into. But as an arbitrator or as a client or as a counsel, if you can look further into it, and if you lift the screen and find there's a fundamental breach on part of them, then the innocent party is entitled for damages. So the fundamental principle is there must be a breach. If there is a fundamental breach, it goes beyond the normal stipulations of damages. So that is very crucial in all these things which everybody has to keep in mind. The second example that I've given here is an employer where let's assume a contractor is being asked to put up a building, but the building permission or the drawings are never given or given at a very later point in time, which therefore the contractor is not able to finish his work within a due date. Now that is a fundamental breach, now for which the employer must be liable. The same thing would also apply on the other side where a seller is asked to deliver within a particular date and is not able to deliver within that X date. Now that goes to the root of the matter, and that becomes a fundamental breach or a breach of contract, which is very essential. So two case laws we have seen. One is Hadley versus Baxendale. Another is Harberts, which goes one step ahead in spite of an exclusion clause where the compensation is awarded because the breach is so fundamental. Now this takes us to the next important phrase, which is called the but for. It's called the but for test. Now if this test is established, then the automatic consequence would be the avoidance of damages. Now, this is another famous judgment which took place in Australia in 1968. Now, this you can remember as the door and the burglar case. Now, what happened was, here was a party who started a showroom, a showroom, and he put up a beautiful shop, and he wanted to take insurance, a contract of insurance with an insurance company. The insurance company stipulated that you are looking for a burglary and a fire insurance. For me to give you that insurance, you have to ensure that your security is up to the mark. That is, your main door is very, very important. Your door must be secure enough. So therefore, that was a stipulation given by the insurance company. And therefore, the shopkeeper, what he does, he contacts a leading door maker and asks him to install a door to ensure that no burglary happens. Now, a contract is entered, a letter of acceptance is given, a door is put up. A few days later, there were burglars who break opens the door and steals all the apparels in the showroom. Ultimately, the matter goes to the court. Now, here the court makes this test. Would the burglary would have happened if the door had been strong enough? Now they go to the next level of letting in evidence, checking the evidence to see whether the door was an apt door to prevent a burglary. They come to a conclusion it is not, and therefore they say, but for the door not being in a proper manner, the burglary would not have happened at all. Now that is the conclusion that they come to, and ultimately say, as a person who is going to award damages, you have to see this so-called phrase called but for. But for this incident, would a breach have arisen or not? So that is another test which the arbitrators or judges or lawyers or engineers who are going to counsel somebody should have this in mind. Apart from fundamental breach, apart from arising in the natural course of things, this but for test must be employed. So therefore, this but for test is very crucial while determining compensation. So that is why in this slide I have talked about the causal connection between breach committed and the loss or the injury suffered. So but for test is concerned with the finding whether damages would have accrued but for the acts of the defendant. So this is the judgment, Reg Glass Private Limited versus Reverse Locking Systems, 1968, famous Australian case. Here, the contractor failed to install the door as per the terms of the contract, which required a security door and locking system. The client's property was burgled. A suit for was filed claiming damages. The court came to the conclusion that the burglary would not have taken place the contractor had installed the door and locking system as per the terms of contract. Hence, but for is a very crucial word which has to be kept in mind. In Indian context also, this but for test is being referred to in one of the Supreme Court judgments in 1951 Supreme Court, and also in 1987 in Alexander's case. And apart from it, the other thing which these two judgments will tell, apart from but for, please use a commonsensical approach to be adopted to be establish a causal connection between the breach and the loss or injury. Now, this takes us to the reasonable. So first, what we saw was the causation. Next is the reasonableness. Here, what happens is this. There was a contract. The government company wanted a contractor to lay cables. Now, halfway through, for some reason, the contractor was unable to lay cables. So the contract was terminated, and the employer purchases the cable outside and finishes the contract. The point was he sues the contractor for damages. Then on perusal of documents, it was reflected that the employer who had bought these cables outside had actually purchased the cables at a much lesser rate than what he contracted with the defaulting party. Therefore, the court said, yes, there is a breach, but because of such breach, you went outside, you had purchased the cables, but for which you had not incurred any loss at all. And therefore, we are not going to give you anything. Though the breach was established, there was no loss for the employer because he purchased those cables at a much lesser rate in the market, and therefore no damages was awarded because the contract contemplated liquidated damages for breach of contract. So this is how this the test of reasonableness also comes apart from your section 74, the famous words called legal injury or loss. So apart from causation, as an arbitrator or as an engineer who is going to look into a contract, this reasonableness also has to be looked into, which means every facts is a very special fact. So case by case, factually one has to determine or look into. Now this takes us to another leading judgment, which was again in England, which was, in short, you can call this as a swimming pool case. I'll just give you the brief facts of this case before we go into the ratio of the judgment. Here what happened, a house owner had a large piece of land and he enters into a contract with a building contractor to put up a beautiful house along with the swimming pool. Now there are some specifications given by his architect. Accordingly, the contractor goes ahead, puts up this beautiful bungalow along with whatever is required of the contract, and accordingly a swimming pool is also put up. The house is constructed, everything is over. But when the house owner made an inspection, he found that there was a small defect in the swimming pool. What was the defect? When we examine, we come to know. According to the architect's design, the swimming pool should have been 7 feet 5 inches. But the contractor would have put a swimming pool with a depth of only 6 feet. So therefore, the house owner goes to court and says, look, the condition stated that my swimming pool should have been 7 feet 5 inches. But here is a contractor who has breached, but has given only 6 feet depth. And therefore, for me to reconstruct the entire swimming pool, I'll be incurring a value of rupees X, and this has to be compensated to. This was, in short, the case of the landlord. The court looks into all the documents and gives a very interesting finding. The first thing that they do was whether the swimming pool could be used or not. Now, house is constructed, swimming pool is also constructed. Therefore, substantial performance is over. Number two, whether the swimming pool, which is the main crux of the issue, whether the swimming pool can be used. Now, they checked the local laws. The local law said the swimming pool must be a minimum depth of 5 feet. Now, that is complied. Now, what is the height now? It is 6 feet. Now, whether this can be used for swimming, the answer was yes. They went into a lot of documents and then came to a conclusion, yes, 6 feet swimming pool could be used. Now, the owner argued, no, I can't dive into the swimming pool. That is why I wanted 7 feet 5 inches. Now, again, court goes into the basic fundamentals and comes to a conclusion. There is no bar under the law that a 6 feet swimming pool cannot be used for diving. Therefore, the swimming pool constructed, though it is 6 feet, which is a breach of contract when compared to the quantities, when compared to the stipulations of 7 feet 5 inches. The swimming pool can be put into good use. Diving can be done. Swimming can be done. So what is the problem? Therefore, they go and give, in this judgment, if you read, they have given a beautiful illustration that I've called as a blue tile, yellow tile illustration. What the judges would have done in this House of Lords judgment is, they give an illustration to come to the ratio of this judgment. What they say is, let's assume you ask a contractor to put up a bathroom with all amenities. Now, the contractor does his work, the bathroom looks nice, everything is functional. But there's one small mistake. The stipulation said you must have a blue tile, but the contractor uses an yellow tile. Now, is it a breach? Yes, it is a breach. But for this breach, should the contractor be responsible to pay damages? Now, this is where the judges say, now this blue tile, yellow tile conundrum is an aesthetic value, but the value of the bathroom remains the same. The bathroom can be used, the toilet can be used, the amenities are functional, except for the fact that the color of the tile changed. There was no other breach. So therefore, the owner who comes to the court for an aesthetic value cannot have any gratuitous benefit. Yes, there is a breach for which a nominal damage can be avoided, but he can't say, I will destroy or I will demolish the entire bathroom again, and I'll use another contractor to complete it. And this risk and cost, or this monies that I expend on another contractor, should be borne by the defaulting party. The court says no, because it is unreasonable. They use this example to come to a conclusion in the swimming pool case to say it is unreasonable for the landlord to come and say that he will demolish the entire swimming pool and put up a new pool, and therefore giving an estimate saying this will be the cost for reinstatement of the swimming pool is unreasonable. It is not at all proportional to the breach, and therefore we are not going to award the damages that the landowner had sought for. So the most important principle, because the last example we saw in that cable case was test of reasonableness, it is further blown up here to say it cannot be unreasonable. We have to see what is the nature of the claim that a party is seeking. There was no necessity here for somebody to seek for a restitution or a reinstatement of the entire swimming pool. And if that is allowed, that will only give a gratuitous benefit to the landowner, and therefore they refuse the exceptional damages or the special damages which he had sought for. Now, comparing this example, because the next example which I'm going to give is part of section 73 itself. Now, if you see section 73 itself, you have a lot of illustrations. One of such illustrations says this. Now, a contract is given to a contractor to put up a building. Now, the contract is completed, but after some time, the entire building falls down. The entire house crumbles and falls down. Now here, what can be the damages or the consequential losses which the landowner can be entitled to? Here, the courts would obviously give a reinstatement cost, that is a risk and cost for putting up the entire house. And as a special damage, until a new house is put up, anyway, the landowner has to stay outside. So which means if he incurs additional cost, even that will be put up. So to that extent, so what is more important is what is the nature of breach and what is the nature of claim that is being made. So this illustration you will find under section 73 itself. Now this you can compare with the previous illustration that I gave for the swimming pool case. Though there was a breach, the fact that that breach did not disentitle the landlord to use the swimming pool. Therefore, the judges said you are entitled only for nominal damages, but not for the reinstatement. But here in this illustration given under the 73 of the Indian Contract Act, here the contractor would be liable for all the damages because the construction was so bad that the landowner has to redo the entire building, and as a consequence, the other losses, the special losses, also have to be paid. Now, these are the fundamentals of the causation. Reasonableness is the most fundamental thing, which leads you to the next question of how you are going to award these damages. Now, the Supreme Court and several High Court judgments and a lot of other judgments throughout the world have have given approval of these formulas which are used, the Hudson formula, the Eichle's formula, the Emden formula. And our Supreme Court in McDermott's case, Emden formula has been approved and other formulas are also recognized. And Hudson formula, as you all know, for the site expenses of all that has been approved by different judgments of various courts. Now, as far as loss of profit is concerned, it does not arise out of a natural consequence, while office overheads, site office overheads, and others are arising out of natural consequences. This is one of the measures of damages that one has to keep in mind. Now, therefore, as measure before awarding of damages, these are the few things which an arbitrator or a party advising has to keep in mind. First is breach. So the plaintiff has to prove the breach, but if he's not able to give any evidence of loss, then only nominal damages would be allowed. Then you'll also have to make a distinction between case of total evidence which renders it impossible to quantify damages and cases where it is difficult to assess damages because of the nature of the damage has to be proved, and the difficulty in assessing should not be a ground to refuse substantial damages. Now, courts or arbitrators are bound to try to get that sum which put the wrong party in the same position as which he would have been if he had not sustained the wrong which entitles to claim damages. The judge or arbitrator has to assess the damages as best as he could on the materials available. Now, is not justified, an arbitrator should not be justified in declining to estimate the damages merely because the agreed party could not adduce the best evidence, but has to decide what the proper measure is, having regard to all attendant circumstances and proved facts and the course of the manner, granting reasonable compensation when it is proved that one of the parties to the contract has committed breach. The degree of arbitrariness, that is where the Supreme Court uses these words. An arbitrator, while awarding, must think about the unreasonableness of awarding damages. There should not be any arbitrariness while awarding damages. It must be fair. The assessment must be fair. And if it is fair, then the courts also do not interfere. Now, these are the dilemmas which an arbitrator or the judges have while awarding damages. One, a party who's breaching the contract will be entitled to damages. So simple justice prevents award damages on conjecture and speculation rather than real proof. On the other hand, concern must be shown to a party who breached should not be carried so far as to penalize the innocent party. Fairly persuasive evidence is enough. The most convincing and best available under the particular circumstances of the case will suffice. Now, these four words are very important: fairness in awarding damages, reasonableness, sensitivity, balanced approach, and best estimate under the circumstances. I would only beseech everybody to just peruse this judgment of Kerala High Court in 1984, which is a landmark judgment on damages of how loss of profits and other damages can be awarded. So this is basically a fundamental view on the unliquidated damages. And as you all know, Section 74 is liquidated damages. It's a cap on damages. So for a claim of for a liquidated damages, the words used under 74 is whether or not actual damage or loss is proved to have been caused thereby would only mean that legal injury would have to be proved. That is what Sopipe said. In fact, this started in the early 60s in our Supreme Court, from Fateh Chand to Maula Bucks to all other judgments. And it ended with Kailash Nath in Delhi Development Authority, 2015, 4 SEC 136, where it says only where it is difficult or impossible to prove the loss arising out of the breach, the proof of loss or injury or damage may be dispensed with. So therefore, liquidated damages should be bona fide and a fair estimate of damages arising from the breach. And as you all know, normally for a delay, liquidated damages is always stipulated under the contract. Every week, every day delay is stipulated and agreed upon. So therefore, this is the relevant portion as far as LD is concerned. Now, generally under building and engineering contracts, you would know on breaches, that is normally the breach would be with respect to delay or non-performance or underperformance, which leads to damages. As a contractor, the most of the claims relate to prolongation claims, underutilization, overheads, head office, site office expenses, escalation, and loss of profits. These are the general claims which you would find in any building and engineering contract. Therefore, case by case approach is required. You'll have to look into the facts. First, establish the breach, If it's fundamental breach, accordingly award damages. If there is a breach, then you can proceed to go into the contractual conditions of what is there a clause on damages. There will be a clause on liquidated damages. Is there a bar to award any other unliquidated damages? That has to be looked into. So therefore, in Ramnath's case, this is what the Supreme Court has said. Delay in completion of construction cannot always be attributed to the contractor. It is settled law that when delay is due to the acts of the employer, then the employer cannot be exonerated of his responsibility to pay damages by granting extension of time, unless the employer established that the contractor has consented to accept the extension alone in satisfaction of his claim for the delay. So in this case, what would happen is, as compensation, extension of time would have been awarded. And of course, the doctrine of quantum merit, where there is a breach or where there is an additional work or something that is done and the rates for which is not provided in the contract, then the arbitrators can travel outside and give a market rate to the work done. So that is the quantum merit principle. So to me, I have just given a bird's eye view of law of damages from the perspective of the building and engineering contract by just quoting you these 4 or 5 important judgments which will give you the basics. So this is my small presentation. I'm open to any questions that can come forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such an informative session. I think we'll just move on to the question and answer session. So our first question answer is from our esteemed Mr. Krishnamurthy Arkat, sir. So the question is, which is the law of damages applicable for the loss of reputation due to illegal encashment of performance bank guarantee? Please cite case laws. This is the question, sir.
Which is the law of damages applicable for loss of reputation due to illegal encashment of performance bank guarantee? Please cite case laws. Now there are 2 questions in this. One is, if the illegal encashment of bank guarantee is proved, then the courts will obviously come down heavily on the party who has invoked that bank guarantee. But in a commercial contract, there is no question of loss of reputation. See, these are not a defamatory suit where you can claim for loss of reputation. So therefore, even if a bank guarantee is invoked illegally, I do not think the party would be entitled for loss of reputation. Loss of reputation or defamatory claims are something which is completely different and has got nothing to do in a contractual matter or a commercial. So in my opinion, you're not entitled for loss of reputation for illegal encashment.
Okay, sir, I hope that answers the question. So the next question is from an anonymous attendee. So the question is, please give highlights regarding to the quantification of damages and evidence required to justify. Okay, now very general question, but the point is this. Now, as far as quantification is concerned, as I said, the best evidence is what is available to the contractor can be presented. Now, let's assume, that is why I also in the presentation referred to some of the formulas, the Hudson formula, the Eichley's formula, and the Emden's formula. Even in McDermott's case, if you look, in that case, the contractor, to prove his overheads, would have provided a chartered accountant certificate and would have asked his general manager to get into the evidence box to show that they were maintaining the overheads throughout the extended period. That, along with chartered accountant certificate, in support of such statement, was enough for the Supreme Court to award damages. So whatever is possible for you to provide. See, first thing you have to do is to establish the breach. Once you establish the breach, as a corollary, you'll have to show some evidence that you've incurred some loss. So how do you do it? In most cases, it will be difficult or impossible to establish the complete loss. So that is why these formulas come into existence. Let's say overheads, every year you have overheads of 5% or 10%. So that balance sheets can be provided to show to the court that throughout the year, this company spends about 12% or 13% on overheads. Now, that is a proof enough which the courts have acknowledged. Okay, sir. So I'll just move to the next question, sir. Thank you for answering that question. The next question is from Saru Chatterjee. Whether L&D penalty can be compensated in the same contract in case of a breach?
No, both are two different concepts. In fact, there was one judgment which I came across which said there is no big difference between LD and penalty. But in India, we go with liquidated damages as far as building engineering contracts are concerned. It is never both.
Okay, sir, I hope that definitely answers the question. So the next question is from Mr. Satish Kumar, and this is quite a big question. I'll just read the question, sir. Suppose in the contract, employer commits to hand over the entire site within 9 months of the contract. Further, the contract also stipulates that the damages are not payable for any delay in handing over of a site by the employer. However, he fails to hand over the site within 9 months. Under these conditions, is it a breach by the employer?
There are difference of opinions in the judgments itself on this issue. But here, if you look at the question, the employer commits to handovers, which means there is some clause which says the entire site must be handed over. Let's say in this illustration which Mr. Satish Kumar has put, the contract has to be completed in 12 months, and he doesn't hand over the site even after 9 months from the date of letter of acceptance. Now, this is a fundamental breach, and he will be entitled for damages. So it depends on the case to case, and that's why I also referred to the exclusion clause that I showed in one of my presentations. Assuming there's an exclusion clause, in spite of the bar, if there is a fundamental breach, you will be entitled for escalation. The famous judgment is Satyapalan versus State of Kerala, where in the original contract there would be a bar in the contract would be silent on escalation. Now there would be some law and order problem, which would have arisen because of the state government of Kerala. The contractor again would have gone to the government and said, you need to give me extension of time. There is law and order problem. I'm not able to work at site. We have to sort it out. Extension of time would be given, and a supplementary agreement would be entered into, where a specific stipulation would be stated in the supplementary agreement stating that no escalation will be granted. So for the original contract, which is silent, would be transformed into a supplementary contract which would specifically bar the contractor from raising escalation. And at the end and after the contractor would go to court seeking for escalation. Ultimately, the Supreme Court would have granted him escalation, saying even though there is an exclusion under the supplemental contract, the breach cost is fundamental, so fundamental that the government did not help you in preventing the law and order problem. They could have done so many things in mitigating the damages that they've not done, and therefore escalation would have been granted in that case. So there are judgments to show that if the breach is fundamental, you are still entitled for damages. But here the illustration given by Satish Kumar is apparent that the breach is so fundamental that he will be entitled for damages. Because 9 months if somebody doesn't give site, there are again plethora of judgments, English judgments on site itself, of how important that the handing over of site on day one is very important. And you can't ask the contractor to wait ever and then give the site. So therefore he will be entitled for damages.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering this question practically with a recent citation. Next, I have a general question, sir. The question is, can you give an example of a non-fundamental breach?
Sorry?
Can you give an example of a non-fundamental breach?
No, see, a non-fundamental breach is Hadley versus Baxendale. Now, fundamental breach is what I relate to Harlan. If you can establish a breach, see in Hadley, the carrier had to give the goods within X date. He has to transport that shaft within that X date. Now that was not done. That is a simple breach. Now in Harbort's case, the 120 degree, he has to maintain the storage capacity. Now because of that, and in that very clause, they had a compensatory, they had an exclusion clause saying that even if there is a breach, he will not be entitled for any damages. That is where the judges use the word, the breach is so fundamental that it was because of him the fire was caused. So therefore, in normal circumstances, if a stipulation is violated, it is breach. But one step ahead, if case-to-case basis, if you analyze, if you also include the but-for test, then you will come to this conclusion of what is a fundamental breach. Like example, this what Satish Kumar himself gave an earlier handing over of site. Now, handing over of site, refusal to hand over of site is a fundamental breach. There could be several breaches. The contract, the employer would not have, let's assume the employer should make payments within 28 days. That doesn't happen. He pays after 40 days. That is a breach. But not giving site is a fundamental breach. That without which the work cannot start at all.
Okay, sir. If that answers the question, I'll just move on to the next question. So this question is related to the current scenario. So I'll just read the question.
Yes.
In the present COVID-19 conditions, related lockdowns, the contractors are asked to stop the work as it is where it is. Can the contractor claim damages after resuming his contract? It is from Avi Sastry, Mumbai, sir.
Yeah. See, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, the government has come out saying it is this is a force majeure situation. Now, once it is said it's a force majeure situation, then you know the law on force majeure is slightly different. But from the contractor's angle, he'll be entitled to damages with respect to extension of time. Now, extension of time itself is a compensation that is given to a contractor. So the contractor will be entitled to extension of time. But a lot of contractors have this problem. They could have, what would have happened is during this 3 months, the steel prices would have gone up or the sand prices would have gone up. Would they be entitled for this escalation of prices? It's a very debatable question because the delay cost is not due to the government, is neither due to the contractor. It is beyond the control of both the parties. Therefore, in fair sense, he'll be entitled for extension of time, but escalation, I have my own doubts. But if you can prove that the delay was caused due to the employer, then you'll be entitled for cost. But here, the delay is not due to the employer or the government or anybody for that matter. It's completely beyond our control. So therefore, time as extension, yes. Time as compensation, yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering all the questions. Now, I'll just hand over to our Dr. Nanathabi sir for addressing, sir.
So you have to unmute.
Yes, sir.
Colonel sir, you have to unmute, sir.
So you have to unmute your mic, sir.
Nanathabi,
So
your mic is to be unmuted. Your mic is muted.
Good evening, President. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir, completely.
May I request our President to just speak about our today's webinar and highlight some points?
Yeah, I in fact have quite a bit to say. So I will take maybe 5 minutes. Do we have that much time? I think we can overshoot the time by a little few minutes, maybe.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
First of all, I thank Mr. Rishikesh for giving a very nice lecture on this very important topic. And see, these buildings and contracts, that is a very special types of contracts, and the damages come in a very varied form. So it is actually, as he said, it's a case-to-case basis only one can decide. It's not easy to generalize the damages in the case of buildings and contracts. With that, now there are a few points. First is about this so-called Hudson formula and Emden formula. Let me tell you that no court has ever approved any of the formulas. Never. They have merely said that the arbitrator has adopted some formula and we do not find any reason to interfere in that. That is his judgment, that we have nothing to say. They have never approved per se any formula. That is one thing. Second thing, this Hudson formula, which is very commonly used, if you read the book, Hudson's book, there are a number of stipulations before you can apply that formula. Unfortunately, I have not seen any judgment or any arbitration award where anybody has analyzed the prerequisites before applying that formula. Secondly, even that Hudson formula, if you take the latest Hudson book, see, this Hudson formula was there, I think, about 15 years back. In the edition which was in the latest edition, which is also 15 years older, there is no Hudson formula at all. So we are not really keeping up to date with the books, with the conditions. The Hudson formula is gone absolutely in the edition which is about 10 years older. The Hudson formula was existing much earlier. So one has to be really objective, and then comes the, I would like to say something about the swimming pool case and the bathroom case. As the court has said, yes, nominal damages may be allowed, but there are conditions. Suppose somebody is particular that he wants a blue tiles only, and insists for changing them. And if the contractor does not change them, he actually gets it done by through anybody else, then he would be entitled to damages to the extent of actually incurring that cost. But if he merely claims damages by not doing anything, then yes, only nominal damages can be awarded. So it all depends upon the circumstances. I have come across several cases in which some defect was there in the works, but the department did nothing to rectify the defect. No money was spent. And in some cases, actually the money was spent in rectifying it. So where the money is actually spent in rectifying the defect, then the damages have to be awarded for rectifying the defect. But where it is merely a claim without actually doing anything, then yes, we cannot. We can merely allow some nominal damages. So it is not a very simple matter. Even the judgment as sorted by them, we don't know whether the party wanted to change the tiles or not, or whether they were actually done. So the facts are not known. So, but that is what the actually situation is. And I think that's all I will say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. Thank you for your explanation. May I request past President O.P. Goyal sir to share his experience?
I just want to clarify on what Mr. Agarwal just said. The tiles was just an illustration given by the judges in the swimming pool case. In the swimming pool case, the landlord did not reinstate. He wanted to reinstate and therefore sought for damages. He did not destroy the swimming pool.
So then
He said,
then
yeah,
only nominal damages.
yeah, that is why nominal damage is given, and that is why when giving that this tiles example was given, because it is only an aesthetic value. It has no other functional value. On that context, that judgment was decided. And as far as formula is concerned, sir, McDermott has a specific line which says these formulas are approved today. So McDermott has recognized these formulas. McDermott, a Supreme Court in McDermott's case have approved these formulas.
No, I have read it.
Have recognized that these formulas can
No,
be used.
I'm sorry, I beg to differ. I don't think there is any word of approval. It is merely
Recognized. The word recognized.
गोयल साहब आपका माइक ऑन करिए सर. गोयल साहब माइक ऑन नहीं है आपका. गोयल साहब माइक ऑन नहीं है.
I have muted.
Yes, sir.
May I speak?
Yes, sir.
You want me to speak?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. But the president, past president, Mr. Indra Vijan, my old friend, other colleagues, it has been a delight to hear the lecture, very lucid and covering a lot of aspects. And then details given by the president are really very interesting as far as the engineering contracts are concerned. See, in the carve of damages, lot of claims are getting paid by, I won't put any word there, by the arbitrators as per claims made. These formulae give a very inflated figure of damages unrelated to the actuals. The courts have allowed, and in the last one which you say, because the arbitrator was X, I won't speak here in public, that is why it has been accepted by the court. What the president said, none of the formulae have been certified by the courts as acceptance by the courts. They have allowed the arbitrators to use any method, including any reasonable formula or any reasonable method. What I have been doing, large number of cases come for damages, the arbitrator has to assess as to what is a reasonable amount of damages which the party has really suffered. And he has to make reasonable assessment on the basis of the data. What machinery remained idle, what resources remained idle, why did he keep them there, why they were not let off. So it's a very big exercise. I ditto what Mr. Agarwal has said. It has to be reasonable and justifiable amount of damages and based on real facts. I don't have anything because time is limited. And to cover, Mr. Rishikesh has covered such a vast subject in a very short period. I must congratulate him.
Yes,
Thank you very much, sir.
I'll just take one more comment. You see, this, for example, this Hudson formula, there is one basic problem. You see, if suppose there was a 2 years contract, and in the 2 years period, only 50% work was done, and the remaining work was done in the next 1 year, and you work out the damages, some X amount comes. Suppose in the same 2 years period, somebody has done 99% work, and the 1% work was done in 1 year, then also the damages amount comes the same. So this formula do not take into account the nature and the quantum of work remaining to be done after. So that is why these are not proper. They are not properly applied. One has to take into account the nature of work remaining to be done and the quantum of work remaining to be done. So these are not very simple, and they are not truly reflecting the right calculations, right way of calculation of the damages. Anyway, so thank you very much. But
thank you for your excellent sharing experience. Now may I request P.R. Sheshadri, past president, to just unmute and speak 2 minutes, sir.
Mute.
You are muted. Unmuted. He should mute. Yeah, no.
Congratulations to Mr. Rishikesh for choosing the right topic on the present juncture. The law of damages is applicable in all arbitration cases because damages will be one of the claim in every arbitration. And I agree with the view of the Goyalji that the arbitrator to apply their mind in fixing the reasonable quantum of the damages, compensation. And also I support Mr. Agarwalji that the Hudson formula, what is referred is very, very old. It requires refinement. Anyway, a lot of deliberation has gone. Thank you for the nice presentation, Mr. Rishikesh. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. May I request Advocate Inbovijan sir to summarize, and before that, Advocate Rishikesh can say something. If any points left out.
No, I mean, thanks for the opportunity. I mean, it was really interesting for me also.
For that. Before vote of thanks, Advocate Inbovijan sir can summarize it, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Rishikesh, for the excellent presentation, particularly in the lucid manner. Within a short time, even though a time was granted, additional 5 or 10 minutes, smartly Rishikesh as a real-time contractor didn't utilize that time and effectively completed within 40 minutes. Thank you, Rishikesh. And this topic, what he has taken today and the way how he delivered the message, it's a wonderful way of reaching the audience. And on behalf of the participants and IITR members as well as the KFCRA, we are wholehearted thankful for Rishikesh for sharing his knowledge on particularly on the liquidated damages and the constitutional damages. Thank you, Rishikesh. I'll hand it over to Engineer Shivaraman, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Rishikesh, you have given an educative information lecture, and I know your vast experience of as a leading advocate counsel for the arbitration. We could gain very much knowledge from you. It was very informative, and you are also known to us well. You said as if you are coming the first time to meet us, so you are known to us well. You have given lectures to our TNSC chapter. So special thanks to you for once again meeting you. Then I should thank the dignitaries Agarwalji, Goyalji and Sheshadri for their effective discussion information and supporting facts given to us. Then KFCRI and Indo-Indian advocate and his team are always in excellent coordination with her in conducting webinars. Thanks them. He has many talented youngsters. He's developing them to become leading, tomorrow's advocates for Council of Arbitration or even arbitrators. To name some of them, I can say Swedan, Shahrukh Kumar, Ms. Nikhila, and Shanmugan. Then I should thank the participants. Only with their encouraging participants, we could conduct webinars well. And I thank Engineer Laladambi, Colonel Laladambi for ably organizing this seminar. Thanks, one and all.
Thank you so much, sir. We are having a council meeting on 18th July. Council member may participate. Thank you so much and good evening to all, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Rishikesh, for as Mr. Invajan said, it was done in a very lucid manner and a very short time. For that, you must be congratulated. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
So thank you all. So all the unattended questions and unanswered questions will be directed to the lead panelist, and we'll get back to you via mail. So if you have any other questions, you can write to us at kfcri.area@gmail.com or iatr.hq@gmail.com. So for the next webinar, we will reach you through mail with all our latest updates. And to know more of this recent webinar, this conducted webinar, you can watch through our YouTube KFCR YouTube channel. Thank you all.